Welcome everyone to our workshop on slaying zombies, how workplace engagement impacts your brand. I'm going to attempt to stay on my mark, so we'll see how well that works. So I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping notes. Definitely, this is going to be a workshop. We're going to ask that you're engaging with the people around you, so make sure there's some people around you. There's some handouts that we'll be using throughout this. We're gonna, the book, Slaying Zombies, we have some copies available. There's not enough for everyone, but there is a digital copy available to download. There will be QR codes at the end. The last slide has all the QR codes. The deck will be available. Take as many pictures as you want, but you don't need to. The deck will be available. All right, so finally, the last thing I want to mention is that my co-presenter, Will Percy, is coming to us live from Asia. He travels all over the world. He's a British national citizen, and just due to some travel restrictions and things, he's coming to us live. So you will see him in that window. We have John Belgeri as mission commander. He's going to be flipping all of the switches, and I think that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and get started. So I've been asked to make sure that we all remember the SMPS Code of Conduct. There is a QR code on the screen if you need to see a copy of the complete policy. And with that, welcome once again. My name is Jerry Gennaria, and I am the president of TOKY, St. Louis-based branding and strategy firm. I'm also a nerd. I'm a data nerd, a design nerd, a brand nerd, and I love to take things apart and see what makes them tick. And more importantly, I like to figure out how to make them better. I've dedicated a lot of my career to making brands better, and as we're going to talk about throughout this session, brands are really just a collection of the experiences that we create as organizations and are shared by people. So any work with brands really starts with people. And that's what has led me to Team Optix. John and Will are from Team Optix, and my friend and colleague, Dr. Will Percy. So Will and I first met and bonded almost immediately over a shared point of view about people and brands. Dr. Percy is a specialist in organizational behavior and applied psychology, and he spent more than 20 years developing and training leaders all over the world. He's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development in London, and he has a focus on innovation and knowledge exchange. And most importantly for today, Will is a zombie slayer. And as I mentioned, in addition to Will, we're also joined by John Belgeri, one of Team Optix lead coaches, and he's also our coach at TOKY. So he'll be helping to facilitate the exercises we're doing throughout the workshop, and as I said, he is mission commander. So at TOKY, we work with a lot of AEC firms, and we help them with their branding, their identity, their messaging, and of course, in that work, we almost always hear some version of this statement, our people make the difference. How many of you, talking about your firm and what differentiates you, have said something to that effect? Raise your hand. Okay, good. That's almost everybody, and that's what our research says. We did an SMPS foundation study a couple of years ago, and that's exactly what we heard. Our people was the number one answer when we asked marketers about what is your firm's unique point of differentiation. And while saying our people makes the difference is not necessarily differentiating, it's not wrong either. Everything that we deliver as AEC professional service firms requires and depends on our people. Even back in the 1980s, Sam Walton recognized that people make the difference. It was the company's slogan for many years, and in 2015, they actually brought it back as the company's slogan. Sam would wear a hat with that and buttons with that on it. The problem is that the Walmart brand today doesn't necessarily deliver on that. For all of its value and low prices, it's just not widely perceived as a great place to work. And I'm not here to debate whether or not it is. I just know what the headlines say, and in branding, perception is what matters. So even if you as a firm don't have a negative reputation as an employer, you're still living in 2025, and work is just not the same. It's hard to overestimate how different the workplace is today since COVID. We have work from anywhere, everywhere, wherever people want. We have generative AI, we have global economics, we have geopolitical environment, we have generational shifts, anybody? And we have in AEC, the missing middle, right? We talk about this, I think it's one of the top trends that the fellows talked about yesterday, an entire cohort of mid-career professionals that were lost largely due to the 2008 recession. It's a problem that's almost entirely unique to the AEC industry. And this has left a gap that has forced firms to train and promote younger talent faster than ever. It's like a hothouse or a greenhouse for training people. And if that's not enough, though, some firms, just to complicate things a little more, suffer from a toxic company culture. In one study conducted a couple of years ago, 62% of workers cited toxic company culture as their #1 reason for leaving their job. The cost of turnover is significant for employers. E.L. Goldberg and Associates said that the real cost of turnover is often estimated to be, get this, 33% to 2 times the annual salary of the departing employee, depending on how complex the position is. And how many of us think that our architects, engineers, project managers, et cetera, positions are not complex? So that means that if you work in a 100-person organization with 20% turnover and an average salary of $80,000, turnover costs your company somewhere between $500,000 and $3 million a year. And a lot of that cost, 2/3 of that cost, is soft costs: lost productivity, lost knowledge, errors. And 33%, the other third, is hard costs: recruiting, background checks, temporary workers that you need in the interim. So there's a lot of costs involved: the cost of hiring somebody, the cost of onboarding somebody, the lost productivity, the lost engagement of the team that they work with, customer service errors, training costs. It just takes time, right, to bring a new person up to speed. And even worse, if you hire the wrong person, the effect on the team can be not only expensive, but just debilitating. Hiring the wrong person can ultimately cost you more than even not hiring. But the biggest cost in our organizations is the impact to culture. From quiet quitting, which we heard so much about and really is still there, as Dr. Percy is going to talk about in a minute, to outright hostile workplaces, we're faced with zombies in the workplace. And that brings us to the point of today's session. What are workplace zombies, and why do we need to slay them? So I'm going to let Will take it from here for a few minutes.
Okay, so it's a delight to be able to stream in this afternoon. Sorry, this morning for you guys, this evening for me. So as Jerry was saying, we really need to define what workplace zombies are. And so in our mindset, workplace zombies are about leadership strategies and organizational strategies that just don't work. There's no evidence backing them. There's no research backing them. But despite the lack of impact, they keep rolling on like B-movie zombies, almost impossible to destroy, impossible to kill off, or as we like to say, impossible to reanimate. Now, as far as workplace zombies go, we believe that superhero leadership and micromanagement are the 2 biggest challenges that the workplace faces. And it gives rise to us, for us to a question: which came first, the zombie leader or the zombie follower? Now, at Team Optix, we think it's the zombie leader that came first. And I think we can see this through engagement in the workplace. So just to move on, let's just think for a moment. You can see there's 10 people up on the screen. What I'd like you to do is just to think to yourself and lock it in your mind: how many in 10 are engaged at work? So how many people in 10 are engaged in the workplace? Okay, if you've got that locked in, we'll reveal that now, and we can see that 1 in 10 people is engaged at work. That means 90% of people globally are unhappy coming to work. That's terrible. Work should be a sense of fulfillment and happiness for us all. That's what we believe at Team Optix. But globally, for the last several decades, it's always hovered between 80 to 90% as a global figure. Okay, let's ask the next question. Jerry mentioned quiet quitting. Think for yourselves for a moment. What percentage of people, how many in 10, are quiet quitting in the workplace? Coming, not putting their full effort in, just kind of letting the things glide by. Have you got that number in your mind? Okay, that's 70% of the workplace are absolutely quiet quitting on the job. At worst, they're even looking for other jobs at the same time. So that's obviously going to have an impact on us. But before we move on to talk about that impact, let's just ask the last question, or let's talk about the 20%. So the last 20% are so unhappy at work that they're seeking to destroy the workplaces that they're in. I'm going to say that again. The last 20% are so unhappy that they're seeking to destroy the workplaces that they're in. Now, another way of looking at this is there's twice as many people trying to undermine the activities of the organization as there are trying to push forward the mission and vision of the organization. Okay. Now, that matters to me because I believe everybody should be happy in the workplace. I believe psychologically it's important to be part of a high-performing team and part of a high-performing organization. But actually, as we move on, what we can see is this actually has a significant impact on the bottom line. So we all use the cliche, our people are our most important asset. Well, yes, they are. Let's put a figure to that. So what we can see here is that if you go from good to great culture, and I emphasize here good to great, not bad to great, good to great culture, then you're going to have approximately 800% increase in share returns and about a 500% increase in revenue in the organization. So what we know is if our people are engaged, if we're all pushing together in the same way, then we can have massive improvement. And I would challenge anybody to find a business activity that will create a greater improvement than investing in your people and getting engagement in the workplace. For those of you that are looking for the stats, we can see that's from Peters and Waterman, who did a study over 20 years of returns on organizations that were reviewed as being good to great. And then Cotter and Heskett, again, we're looking at the difference from good organizations to great organizations. So we can really see this branding within, how we deal with our people is massively impactful on both individual lives and on returns in the organization. On that note, I'll pass back to Jerry.
So one of the things is, many of you are in this room are marketers or in business development, not HR, right? So you're thinking, okay, what's the point to all this? And there is a direct connection between culture and brand. And so I want to talk for just a second about what that connection is. We have to start with what is a brand. We believe that a brand is comprised of three things. Number one is your brand position. It's what you do and it's who you do it for. The second thing is what we call your brand truth or your unique point of view. Often what you do and who you do it for is not really different than many of your competitors, right? You're in the same sectors, you're doing the same kinds of work, you're in the same geographies. What truly sets you apart is your unique point of view, how you think, how you behave and believe. And then the final component to a brand and the real essence of it is the brand experience. People's lived experience working with your organization. And in professional service firms, as we said, this is driven almost entirely by the people in the organization. So that's why we believe in this concept, as Will said, of branding from within. What you value and believe guides your behaviors as an organization. And it guides the people in the organization. These values, these beliefs create your culture and your employee experience. How your team behaves shapes your client experience. It's intuitive, right? We could just think about our client experience and what happens when they work with your organization is directly connected to how our people behave. And that in turn is driven by those beliefs and values. So Will's going to talk about the zombies that creep into your culture and what we can do about them.
Okay, so as Jerry was talking about, it's about brand experience. And I could feel a sigh in the room as half of you think like, yeah, right, Jerry, tell us something we don't know. So the first question I would pose is what gets in the way? What stops us developing this amazing brand experience that unlocks discretionary effort? And the first thing that I'd like to say is actually majority of business practices are actually outdated and don't meet the needs of the organization. They're what we would call deficit-based experiences. We look for a way to find the problems that people have. Now, if we think about current appraisal systems, for instance, the average manager spends about 5 weeks a year, by the way, engaged in appraisal. It costs about $3,000 per employee, and 90% of HR professionals will tell you that it's an absolute waste of time. We deliver feedback too late, we give too little feedback, and we don't move people forward. And as we can see from the cartoon, it actually just becomes a gotcha moment. We kind of drop people into a hole and see if they can dig their way out before the next appraisal round. And if they can't, then they leave the organization. This is deficit thinking. It's been around for about 2 millennia, and it's actually the backbone of our more common psychology and business practices. If you think about it, we often seek to identify weakness and to fix that weakness. But actually, what we need to be doing is to focus on strengths and how we can build people's strengths, how we can put them at the center of their own learning journey. Unfortunately, this isn't what tends to happen in the workplace. It actually becomes more like a gladiatorial environment. So if you think about it, to progress in your career in most organizations, it's about how you kill people, step over dead bodies, and move your way up the career ladder. Now, I'm just going to put it out there. I think that might be a problem for building psychological safety, but hey, what do I know? It's just lived experience, right? But I can think most of you have probably been in that kind of organization. But here's another reality. A lot of people don't want to climb the corporate ladder. They want to grow and they want to feel that they're growing in other ways. Now, the challenge in these environments is that what we find is that in order to maintain control of their teams and to push systems and processes focused on quarterly returns, then micromanagement and directive leadership become the norm. Now, the problem with this form of management is actually it's contagious within the organization. So what we see is that basically we move from this gladiatorial space to managers leading in a way that's almost like a virus moving through the organization, where directive approaches, trying to get every last drop of blood out of a stone, become the norm. And it's actually this that causes disengagement. Now, I want to pause there for a second, just before we go into the activity, and actually just remind ourselves, tactical performance is massively important. Systems, processes are needed. But it's when we overplay that strength that we lose empathy and we lose agile approaches. That's what holds us back from breaking through that glass ceiling towards exceptional culture. I'll pause there and pass back to Jerry.
So we're going to take just a couple of minutes, and I want you to start by thinking about what Will's been talking about. Does this match anything in your experience at your firm? And the things that we've been talking about are global statistics. They're for workplaces in general. They may or may not apply directly to your firm, but there are lessons to be taken away. So take a minute, think to yourself, is this what you're seeing in your team's behaviors, in your culture? And then in the small group, and this is your time to find a group of 3 or 4 that are around you that you can have a conversation with and just exchange, is this something that you're experiencing? We're gonna take it back to Will and continue the conversation. So, Will, it's all yours.
I have to say, I'm not sure if I agree with Jerry about it not being good. From a business perspective, if you'd like to pick a business card up at the end, we can help with that. All right. If we think about this idea of zombie leadership, this directive over controlling approach, the first thing I want to make really clear is that actually a tactical approach is really important, and we need to keep that in place. We're talking about additional skills that support the workplace, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but introducing new ideas of agile response. Now, this is actually quite important because traditionally, when we measure what's going well in the organization, we look at things like share price increase, we look at revenue, and all of these things are done on a quarterly basis. They're not necessarily measuring what matters, like organizational learning, the development of your people, recruitment and retention, and why people are going. So we need to be aware of the signs of the apocalypse. So first thing that we have to acknowledge is that in every organization, we need systems and processes. They are vital to the efficient running of the organization, and they will actually take an organization to being good. But as all things in psychology, what we recognize is that your strengths overplayed often become your challenges. And so what happens is no matter whether it's the best envisioned system and process or not, gremlins get into the works. It's going to happen. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments, not being able to imagine what might happen and putting plans in place that don't work. But the challenge is, in a toxic environment, managers are forced to behave like nothing's happening. It's like a crime scene. Hey, folks, move on. Nothing to see here. But actually, behind the scenes, everything's falling to pieces. The managers just don't want to admit it because that could impede their career development, how their teams are perceived, resources that are given to them. And actually, we end up playing the blame game, or we end up hiding conflict, as we'll discuss in a short while. Now, at this point, I want to be really clear. Most of you, when you're thinking about zombie cultures, are thinking, yeah, well, we get it. This is an overly competitive in culture, right? Stab somebody in the back, step over them, all great. But actually, what I'd like to point out is that there are generally 4 types of culture: controlling or collaborative, creative, and competitive. These work on an axis, and there's a tension between them. Now, whilst a competitive culture may become over competitive, just think about this. A creative culture could become overly creative. We might have teams that are lacking controlling elements, that are not competing and getting things to market on time. And so actually a different form of toxicity comes about. So we should all keep that in mind. It's not just over competitiveness. What we also find, though, as we're looking at these zombies, is that it's not just about the manager hiding things. In order to meet quarterly goals and in order to be directive, we monitor people. And unfortunately, that monitoring is often by stealth. And the problem with monitoring by stealth is that it actually breaks trust. It causes distrust. It causes people not to feel valued and they want to move on. Now, again, we need to be clear here. It's absolutely okay to monitor. It's absolutely okay to track progress. In fact, I would often say trust but verify. But to do it by self, not to have transparency, not to work well with others, creates distrust and they leave the organization. Now, the problem when we get a lot of people leaving the organization is we end up with a lot of what we call churn. There's this turnover happening, people are leaving. Those that are left behind actually feel scared. Fear creeps in, and so they stop sharing. And as they stop sharing, this gremlin of loss of organizational knowledge and innovation comes about. So we hoard knowledge. We hoard it because it's power, but also we're scared to give our real opinions, and we're worried about what happened to the people that left before us. And maybe we're even looking for work. So, hey, let's take that knowledge with us somewhere and leverage it up to add something as we move to a new organization. Now, the challenge with that is, as if the fifth discipline, centered that organizational learning or organizational knowledge and innovation is perhaps the only sustainable strategic advantage. So the reason investing in our people brings this 800% return on shares, 500% return on revenue is because our people give us discretionary effort. They put their full effort in if we are working with them. So it's important to understand the signs of the apocalypse so that we can start to be aware of and address them. So on that note, I'll hand you back to Jerry.
All right. So we're going to take about 10 minutes, and there is a handout on your chairs, and it's we call this the Diamond 4. And in the Diamond 4, what we're going to ask you to do is really think about what are the things that might need to change in your firm to create a more positive reality. So on the sheet, on the I guess it's on the right-hand side, there's a bunch of lines. I want you to take just a couple of minutes and on your own, jot down a list of the things that need to change, everything that you can think of. And then I want you in your groups to begin to share what those things are, and the goal is to fill in these 4 boxes. What are the top 4 things that if you focused on them would make a significant difference you believe in your organization? And let's try and get that number 1, the thing that will move the needle the furthest, into that top box. All right, we're going to go back to Will in just a second, but how many of you were able to come up with at least one thing to put in that top box? If you weren't able to get there, I would encourage you to keep thinking about it. Take that list that you wrote down, deciding what to put in that top box. So back to Will.
All right, so coming up with those 4 things can be a little bit difficult. And I know we've mentioned already positive psychology, but again, I want to make it clear it's a little bit like playing slot machines in Vegas. You know, when you want to get the jackpot, if you've got 2 wheels in place, you just want to nudge the next wheel so that you can win that jackpot. And positive psychology for us is a little bit like that. But experience shows us that about now, 2/3 of the room are sat there thinking, isn't positive psychology just fluffy nonsense? Well, I can guarantee you the next slide is going to absolutely make you think that even more. Because what we're saying is the thing that makes that nudge happen is making people feel safe and genuinely seen. Everything gets better from there. If we can just make people feel psychologically safe and seen. Now, the thing is, in the workplace, psychological safety doesn't mean you can do what you want, doesn't mean that you can have a job forever. It means that we made a contract when we hired you. You'll come here and work for us and do the best you can to help us achieve our mission and vision because you told us it aligns with your principles, your values. We'll do everything we can to create an environment that helps you do that. Now, judging by the number of people that said they were working with people potentially in toxic workplaces, you may now be saying, well, that'll be the day that pigs will fly. Well, that's great. I mean, apart from the cost of bacon going up, actually flying pigs are a good thing for us. Flying pig case studies are what we look for in organizations where the culture went from good to great. We look to see what happened. And actually, there's never been a better time in the workplace than to do that because Generation Z and Alpha coming up value strong relationships with their managers. They desire personal development, not necessarily climbing the career ladder, but they want to be at the center of a learning journey, of a development journey. They have a really strong sense of fairness and they really, really value social justice. So actually, Generation Z and Generation Alpha are exactly the right kind of people to respond well to positive psychology approaches, as long as we keep the barriers of the boundaries of tactical performance in place as well. So as we think about that, what we really need to think about is actually what is culture and why is it so important? And actually, I don't want to get too complex around this. I'm going to tell you culture is just the way we behave around it. And you'll see as we go through why that's important. It's the way we interact, the stories that we tell, the things that we do, perhaps more importantly, the things that we do when we don't think anybody's watching. And actually, culture is really important because it unleashes potential in the organization. And what we're really interested in unleashing is discretionary effort. People going above and beyond to do what they know needs to be done because their values align with the organizational values. They feel trusted, they feel valued, and they want to make things happen. So what we specialize in Team Optix is using an AI ecosystem and human skills in coaching. We help upskill managers so that they can put individuals at the middle of their own learning journey so that we have a position where people can become their own best selves. Now, traditionally, in Western culture, what we find is that actually that journey in the organization stops there. We focus on promoting people. We focus on career ladders. We focus on the path to be CEO. But not everybody wants that. In fact, you'll know the old phrase, many roads lead to Rome. And actually, there's a power in developing career pathways that empower people to grow and develop, not just head towards being CEO. Now, in Western culture, we also find that we become too focused on the individual. And actually, we need to be thinking about how the team integrates. If we're talking about simple tasks, of course, one person does them faster. But actually, we all know that phrase. two minds are better than one to solve a big, complex problem. So we need individuals to come together effectively in teams. At Team Optix, we have a simple equation that helps us capture that idea. And it's simply me, the individual, being pushed, challenged, supported to be all I can be. As part of we, the team, again, coming together, learning together, collaborating collectively, equals us, a team of high-performing teams, the organization that learns, that actually goes from good to great. Now, you may all be sitting there and thinking that's trite. How can that possibly happen? So let's just ground this again in experience. And so if we think about zombie teams and zombie leadership, what happens when a challenge comes up, as we can see on the left-hand side of this cartoon, is that actually a team will stop and meet and discuss the challenge. Not a lot will happen. In the worst case scenario, we'll have a meeting to discuss how we're going to have meetings, and it carries on from there. A good team will know that there's a challenge. They'll meet, they'll find a way around it, and they'll climb over that challenge. A great team, on the other hand, because they've spent time thinking about how the team dynamic works, supporting each other, knowing each other's skills, knowing the capacity of team members, actually makes it look like there was never a challenge there in the first place. They burst through, they make things happen. So this discretionary ability to actually engage and to use my skills in the workplace is a massive part of developing great culture, because when we align systems and processes faster than our competitors, when we respond to geopolitical environments faster than our competitors, then we are more successful in business, which benefits both the employees and the organization. So on that note, I'll pass you back to Jerry.
So in our last exercise, we were thinking about what are those four things, the strategic keys that if we focus on them can make a significant difference in the organization, can create that cultural change. So this time, I want you to go back to those items, think about them with your group again, but this time I want you to think about what are the things that are stopping you from making the change. We need to really understand what is it that is creating that barrier that we saw in that cartoon, that we're either stopped at the meetings or we're busy spending a lot of effort to climb over when we could be going through. I imagine for some of you it was a lot easier to brainstorm the barriers than it was necessarily the way forward. So we're going to go back to Will.
So Jerry's absolutely right. It's often more difficult for organizations to think about a strategic approach to this. In fact, most organizations get scared, thinking that culture is something for the big boys like Apple or Google with a lot of budget to spend on this. And actually, culture is something that's so hard, so ethereal, that they can't grasp it and don't know where to start. And so that's why we defined culture as the way we do things around here. Because actually, the minimal effort for impact is to think about behaviors and practices. What do we need to change to build better psychological safety, to help people do their jobs better? And of course, the best people to ask are the team, to work collectively, to manage collectively, so that we don't have to be superheroes. And actually, what we often do is set up communities of practice or professional learning communities where we focus on a strategic objective, a behavior we need to change to be more effective. And actually, as we do that, what happens is people start using that discretionary effort and their learning to come back and say, hey, these are the structures that need to change. These are the capabilities that we need to develop to take things further. And then over time, what actually happens for us is that our mindset changes and our culture changes. And this is absolutely the transverse of what most people think. Most people think we need to start with mindset and culture, but actually we need to start talking to each other and thinking about what do we need to change around here to make things better. Now, there are actually 6 core keys that we can change, and we don't have time to spend on each of them, but what I will mention is the most explosive of these is compensation, and it's the one where many people start. But actually, a pay rise, a bonus, will make you happy one day of the year. Culture affects you every day of the year. So I'm assuming that most of you will have a good, strong identity in place. And of course, if you haven't, go and talk to TOKY. They're great at that. They'll help you build the community that's needed so we can focus on the 3 core keys that actually move culture forwards. Developing leadership skills. Now, we know that we need to help develop leadership skills for actually coaching, for conflict management, and for engaging in performance conversations in the moment. That means that we need performance systems that actually help us track development in real time. I'll say that again. We can't waste 5 weeks a year, $3,000 per employee. We need systems that help us track performance right now. And actually, within the organization, we need career paths that we can move beyond that. Now, you'll notice on the left side of the screen that we've actually got this little guy, Dave, sat in the light. He's lost his keys and he's stumbling around looking for them. And actually, this is an analogy for what businesses do. We keep looking for improvement in tactical performance, but actually, we need to get agile. We need to introduce our leaders to what agile performance looks like. What does it look like to work with their teams? How do you deal with performance management in the moment? And again, we come back to a simple equation for that. We need to raise awareness, take responsibility, build confidence and capability to hit high performance. And if you're wondering about, well, what is confidence? Confidence is just using skills in the real world and actually gaining confidence in your ability to deploy them and to understand what capabilities need to be delivered to hit that performance space. And again, I can hear you sighing, even though I can't see you guys. And I know that you're all thinking, yeah, right, tell us something we don't know. Well, let's talk about what gets in the way of that then. So the first thing that gets in the way of that is we all pretend to be really nice to each other, but actually we spend a lot of our time stabbing each other in the back. Now, I was talking to a colleague at Warwick University the other day, and I was saying, hey, I'm working with these fortune companies. You wouldn't imagine the hours they're working, 13, 14 hours a day. And she said, rather tongue-in-cheek, but many a true word is spoken in jest. That's because, their work can be done in 4 hours. They spend the rest of the time figuring out how to stab each other in the back and politic. So I will say many a true word is spoken in jest. And we do have to be worried about how we manage conflict. But actually, open conflict isn't necessarily the worst thing. We avoid conflict when we fear repercussions on our career and on our relationships. And so what often happens is we have these wonderful conversations where we're all sat talking and thinking things through, and we're absolutely not saying what we're thinking. And these gremlins are just sweeping it under the carpet so it all can build up and explode in the future. These are the things that stop us moving forward. But you know what keeps an organization moving and actually takes them to the highest level is the middle managers in the organization, whether it be junior executives, team leaders, middle managers, whatever you want to call them. When equipped with coaching skills and the resources that they need to act in the moment, they actually make a great difference. And our colleague and Professor Bob Thompson at Team Optix develops a cycle of development which actually tells us that story. So first, a manager offers a challenge or a challenging assignment, a task, and he asks open-ended questions. By asking open-ended questions, they actually work through the employee to help them support thinking and to think about what needs to be done to address that challenge. As that happens, we raise awareness and hopefully the employee takes greater responsibility for making things happen. They use their discretionary effort. As we do that, actually, people become really motivated. They have this new relationship with their manager. They're actually interested in their work, perhaps interested in what's going on in the wider sense for them. And so productivity increases. Now, as that happens, the employee learns, develops confidence, and has greater self-belief. So we have this wonderful virtuous cycle developing where we can give them greater challenges. And so the cycle begins again. Now, you'll notice we've been saying throughout, challenge is not wrong. Trying to reach organizational goals, to do the best, is not wrong at all. And in fact, a healthy challenge, when delivered from a relationship of trust and mutual respect, serves to stretch people's thinking and drives them to dig deeper into the reality of their situation and their true potential. Now, we call this a positive, brighter future. So as I said before, it's not about not being hard-nosed in business. Actually, I view positive psychology in a business environment a little bit like the iron fist and the velvet glove. We need the focus on tactical performance, but we also need a focus on relationships. Now, we achieve that by thinking about challenge and support. So we use radical candor, open and honest feedback, and don't sugarcoat things because we don't have time. And of course, challenge comes with support. And that's how we unlock the ability of our teams to move to the best possible culture.
We want to talk about what's stopping the change. What are the things that are in your way? We talked a little bit about barriers. This time, I think we want to talk about the organization, right? We are marketers. We are the folks in charge of the brand. We are business development. We're not HR. And Will's been talking about a lot of things that are about organizational development and team building and things like that. But if people make the difference, then it stands to reason that building a great culture is essential to your work as brand builders in order to be able to have the kind of culture that attracts the right talent and the kind of culture that delivers on the brand promise. So I want you to spend a couple of minutes thinking about the organization and who you need to work with in the organization, how you start to build those relationships, and what are the other things that are getting in the way of affecting the change that you've been putting on the sheet that you have. All right, we're going to go back to Will, but in just a second. But have we come up with some ideas about who we need to partner with in the organization? What are those organizational barriers that we have? See some heads nodding. Some other folks are sleeping. Not really. All right, we're going to go back to Will.
Okay, Jerry, I think you're right. Statistically, about 70% of them are sleeping, apparently, and the other 20% are trying to undermine us today, so just keep watching out for them. All right, guys. What we're really thinking about is we keep talking about this idea of discretionary effort, tactical performance, agile performance. And the challenge is, and one of the zombies that we really need to slay, is we get stuck in the language of tactical performance and the euphemisms that we use around it. You know, hard-nosed business, letting people go, all of that kind of thing. And actually, that really gets in the way of achieving agile performance. And the one thing that we really need to unlock is the power of emotion. And the reason for that is that decisions are emotional, not logical. The change process is emotional, not logical. We need to unlock people's emotions and help them deal with them to move on and to innovate together. Now, you're probably familiar with the Kubler-Ross change curve, where we know that, there's a new change comes in, there's a shock, we have denial, there's frustration, and actually a lot of organizations and teams get stuck in depression and don't manage to move beyond the change. There's a scary statistic that 70 to 80% of change initiatives fail. I'd actually say that's wrong because there's always shades of gray. However, there are some steps that we can take to really move things forward. And one of those is just actually coaching and talking to our team. So we talk about the idea of sense making or sense breaking and experimenting. We want to talk to people about the change, why it's necessary. We need to decide together, what do we need to do to move forward? And then we need to encourage people to experiment. As we do that, we begin to sense make and we adopt new ways of doing things. So as we deal with the emotion, as we help people experiment and share things within the organization, we actually sense make and adopt new things. Finally, we get to the stage of integration and innovation and learning. But actually, as I said before, it's a little bit like an iron fist and velvet glove, because actually what we have to do is insist on the drive to achieve organizational objectives, working with others to do it. But we also have to think about a new skill set that comes with that. And Steve Jobs talks about the idea of remaining humble and remaining hungry. So we need humility and we need to be results focused. Now, what he didn't mention is that actually at the heart of all of these things and relationships is trust. So we need to work hard to build trust within the organization. And this is actually usually the first behavior that we need to address. You see, a lot of business leaders ask me, so how do I get people to believe that this is real and that it's actually happening and that the managers are going to work well with them? That's not a surprising question. when most managers don't know how to interact with their teams, and 70% of the workforce is quietly quitting. And I'll tell you simply, it's about engaging with your team, talking to them, and doing what you say you will do, and actually really building that psychological safety. That's the only thing that builds the trust. But something magical happens when we do that. You see, we get to a point where all of those things that were getting in the way can be addressed because we're humble, trusting, and results focused. We can hold each other accountable. We have connectivity within the team that helps us know strengths and weaknesses, challenges that we need to overcome to perform. We can have creative conflict and we can have commitment. Now, clearly, it's important that we teach these skills to our managers. So what we know from the research is that about 90% of HR professionals are saying that coaching's being pushed off onto the managers. When we ask managers, 90% of them tell us it's part of their job. About 80% say they can do it. But when we watch managers, what we find is about 25 to 30% have got the skills to coach effectively, to manage conflict and to do those things. So we absolutely need to address these new skills and raise awareness in the team about how we can behave to create psychological safety and accountability. At that point, I'll hand back to Jerry for the Wheel of Change.
So you have one last handout that we call the Wheel of Change. And in this last exercise, we want you to we're going to take about 10 minutes with your group, and we want you to think about the change that you have outlined on your Diamond 4 sheet that you want to see in your firm. And we want you to answer the questions: what do you need to start doing, stop doing, or keep doing? And because we want you to be pragmatic about achieving these goals, also, what are the things that you need to just accept and move on, right? There are elements in our organizations that we're not going to be able to change, right? Lord, grant me the serenity, et cetera, et cetera. So what are those things? And let's be honest about them and focus on the things that we are actually able to either start doing or stop doing, or of course, keep doing. And while you're doing it, let's think about those other parts of the organization that we need to work with. As marketers, communications is our primary task and our primary goal. We're telling the story of the organization, but not just externally to customers and prospects, but internally to our own team. And that requires something that very few organizations have, which is a strong connection between marketing, communications, HR, and leadership. In fact, in many of your organizations, if you're a mid-sized organization, you may not even have a very discrete HR function. If you do, it's really focused on compensation and making sure that people get paid and benefits and things like that. But there's a whole other level beyond that that's really, as Will's been talking about, focused on coaching. So let's take the next few minutes, think about this Wheel of Change, and there's some space next to each of these. Jot down your thoughts as a group. Awesome. So I saw a lot of notes on those sheets, so I hope that you're taking things home with you to think about. And before I forget, there are additional copies of both of these worksheet handouts available on the little tables as you leave. Take as many of them as you want. Go back and do these exercises with your teams, okay? I think that you'll find value in doing this with your team as well. All right, so we're going to go back to Will. We've got just a few more things to cover. We're going to try and reserve a few minutes for questions at the end.
Okay, guys. So obviously, this has been very much a whistle-stop tour of what TOKY and Team Optix do as we manage branding from within. But I just want to try and bring things together to link some of these ideas, particularly as they relate to organizational learning and the culture of innovation that is, as we noted, that last strategic advantage for most organizations. So let's just start with a brief summary of the differences between zombie culture and a thriving culture. So as far as selection goes, it's normally short-term and myopic in a zombie culture. But as Jerry said, hiring the wrong person, not getting the right people in place can be a real issue and can actually be worse than not hiring at all. So we want long-term and growth in place. Appraisal needs to be collaborative and innovative, not toxic and cutthroat. We need to be clear and transparent about goals. We need to be clear and transparent about the organization's mission and vision. But we need to make sure that we collaborate and innovate. And that means that we need to be collective and adaptive, not individual and hierarchical in our approaches. And that's not to say that individual performance isn't important. Actually, we talk a lot about kind of Olympic sportsmanship approaches to this kind of thing. I need to be my absolute best in order to engage appropriately with my team. We do need to know what's in it for me, but actually it needs to be overridden with a feeling of what's in it for the team. What's in it for the organization? We need to work to align those values with our behaviors and how we interact with both internal and external customers. Now, we've mentioned a few times the idea of professional learning communities, and I can't just overstate how important these are. So we're going to share with you now part of my own PhD research and work that I've done with John over the last 10 years to think about how we unlock organizational learning. How do we build a culture? And we call this the ICE model. Now, I want to say why it's ICE. ICE is because, as you know, in organizational change, we often talk about freezing and unfreezing the organization. But actually, what I found was that this is happening at an individual and team level all of the time if it's appropriately managed. We freeze and unfreeze constantly to achieve change. And so you'll see there's an important link again. Me, we, us. And the first thing that we want to do is ensure that we're getting good feedback and feed forward. So the first zombie that we've slain is management isn't done to others, it's done with them. We want to make our requirements clear, but we also want to know, how's it going? What do we need to change to make these things happen? How can we innovate together? And we do this through developing coaching skills. And actually, we break the narrative around coaching. It's not just for executives, it should be for everybody in the organization. And so we look at coaching being a way to unlock the innovation. And what we do as we go is we tell stories. We imagine possible brighter futures, and we think about bringing those into reality. So the first space that we do that is by actually thinking about the individual level, me. And as I go into the individual level, as a new change comes about, I need space to imagine and investigate. From the world of psychology, what we would say is that people need room to play in their jobs. And so if we look at how that plays out with the team, then what happens next is that we get data-driven communities of practice, and the coach, manager, and their team are actually engaged in discussion. And that discussion creates this beautiful virtuous loop. Individuals experiment, they share with the team experiments together, and the manager with coaching skills all of the time is helping to collaborate and construct. So we imagine and investigate, we collaborate and construct at the team and individual level. But most organizations forget that managers should be part of a managerial team or a junior executive team, and they don't put enough emphasis on this space. Now, actually, the middle manager, the junior executive, is like the glue of the organization. And actually, what should be happening is they should be coming together to share data and people analytics and the stories between teams so that they can find the common ground and converge to work out what's happening, what's going well in the organization, and what needs to change. Now, in terms of learning, what happens here is the individuals have released their knowledge. They've worked with their managers. They developed new ways of doing things. New systems and processes have emerged. New stories have emerged. And so now we can converge and we can externalize and evolve by sharing this learning across the organization. And actually, what happens here is we get this beautiful virtuous cycle wherein the senior executive suite, the C-suite, is actually giving clear feedback on what the mission and vision of the organization is, how it needs to be implemented in the organization, and then they're getting feedback on how that's working and what needs to change. Now, so many organizations, when they deal with change and culture, send out questionnaires asking people if they're happy and what's going on and if it's working. And it's all for naught because it doesn't change culture. What changes culture is changing our behaviors, changing our systems and processes to create psychological safety and deliver on our objectives. And if we can create these microcosms of discussion, sharing, action, and measuring what matters, then actually we move the whole organization forward. And we can see that again just represented in that final chart, bringing it all together. Feedback, feed forward, coaching at all levels of the organization in order to unleash that discretionary effort, and then reimagining a brighter possible future to achieve organizational aims and objectives. And actually, if you've been following with us, you realize that we've just gone full way around the circle, because it's our values, aligning those with the organization and achieving that culture that makes the difference. So I'll pass back to Jerry to finish off and share that last piece of learning.
So I think one of the most important things about what Will was just talking about in that chart, and again, it'll be in the deck that everybody will get, I know it's a little hard to read in the back, is that link between the middle managers and the leadership of the organization, particularly for those of you who are in organizations that are multi-office and multi-sector. It is bringing those leaders together and allowing them to create an effective team that is going to do more to drive culture in your organization than almost anything else. So as Will said, it's absolutely about your values and your beliefs as the thing that generates what your behaviors are, which is what really creates what your brand experience is. And so if we leave you with one thing today, it's to focus on that relationship between culture and your brand. And as I said earlier, that may mean that you need to partner with HR, with leadership, to talk about how culture impacts the brand. So we hope that the frameworks and exercises that we've shared with you have given you a lot of ideas and tools to get out there and slay some zombies. I want to thank Will for sharing his knowledge and experience. There's a lot more of that in the book. There's a few copies here. Please help yourself and take one with you. And if not, we have a download. All the QR codes are going to be on the screen in just a second. And then if you need help, please reach out to one of us at Team Optix or TOKY. We can really help, and we work together to help build brands with meaning and turn your brand promise into practice. A couple of quick plugs for regular insight, inspiration about this connection between employee experience and client experience. Check out the new podcast that we just launched, the Intangible Brand. It's interviews with folks like you and with leaders like Will to really bring these ideas to life. And if you want to continue the conversations that you've had today, we host a monthly TOKY office hours on the third Thursday at noon Central, and we would invite you to come sign up for that. It's a great conversation each month. So thank you all for your participation. There's ways for you to connect with us. Don't forget to take the survey. Thank you very much. Thank you, Will.